Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And Minister, I welcome your speech and I welcome your leadership, and I hopefully that this will be a transformative day in relation to this matter. The direct provision coincides with my involvement in politics. I went in 99 and direct provision came in 2000. 21 years later, we're finally grown up, in theory at any event. And I hope that you actually make that happen with our support, and we will be pushing you every step of the way. And when I look at your leadership, I have to say I welcome it, but I have to put it in perspective. 21 years. And the 21 years, during that time, we had the Mahon report finally in 2015. We had the spending review in 2019. We had the interdepartmental group on direct provision 2019, the Justice Committee report, the Day report, and your own white paper, in addition to the non-governmental organisations on the ground who work solidly, in addition to the residents themselves seeking asylum, who at every opportunity told us what was going on, in addition to the Ombudsman's reports, who have added to the debate. And your leadership comes on top of that, and a system that none of us could stand over. It was a system designed to commodify, dehumanise, to isolate, to make a division between them and us, but most importantly to ensure profits for the big boys, and some women I'm sure were in there too. And indeed, in 2000, I remember as an innocent councillor saying that we should welcome the asylum seekers to our city, and an experienced, happened to be Fianna Fáil, it could have been any politician, happened to be Fianna Fáil, who said, some things are best left alone. And that typifies the attitude that we have endured for 20-something years, and worse than that, we have deliberately allowed violations of human rights legislation. So if this is a change, and it certainly is in theory, I welcome it and I will be working with you in relation to it. However, there are many things that could be done in the meantime. The amnesty has been mentioned by Deputy McGuinness. Absolutely, we should look at that. And other practical things like in relation to the right to work. There's an inconsistency between the Day report and your own white paper. There are many other inconsistencies, but I'd like to focus on the positive. I've only a few seconds left. I do think it's time to engage with the communities. I come from a city, as you know, in a county where we had the meeting in Oughterard, and notwithstanding how bad and how difficult that was, the message I got from the people was, done properly, they would welcome asylum seekers to their town. And I remember David Staunton, the Minister, talked about a pilot project in relation to communities and facilitating communities to help them. I wonder if you could, in your closing speech, come back to that. Finally, I'm over time. Vulnerability assessments. They're not part of a pilot project. They shouldn't be. There's an obligation on us to carry out vulnerability assessments. So you might clarify that. Carmela Moggett.
Roger. Closing statement then, Minister, back to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the deputies for their detailed contributions on this important debate. Deputy Connolly listed out, I think, the range of individuals and groups who have contributed to the knowledge that we have as an Oireachtas and as a government about the failures of direct provision, and she's correct to acknowledge the work that the likes of Judge McMahon and his group, the likes of the previous Justice Committee that launched their report, and of course all of those who worked on Catherine Day's group. And look, I hope what is different this time is that the determination to act on this is now contained in a programme for government. It is contained in a white paper issued early in the context of a government. It's contained in a move of the accommodation element to a new department, a department that is very much focused on the human rights of individuals, whether it's of children, whether it's of those in direct provision, whether it's of those with a disability. But I've no doubt that the Deputy and other deputies will continue to put the pressure on over the next 3.5 years, and that's absolutely appropriate. I just wanted to talk to the broader issue of housing first, because the likes of Deputy Paddy Daly and Deputy Lahart raised the issue of housing, and I just want to say that the work of implementing the very significant policy change contained in the White Paper will take place in conjunction with the wider actions we are taking to address the housing crisis in this country, and they are laid out in the programme for government: an additional 50,000 social houses, an affordable housing scheme, the introduction of a cost rental, the Vienna model to address issues of the affordability in rental, and of course the continued rollout of the housing first approach in the context of those who are currently homeless and living rough. And that focus on the housing crisis in the country was backed up in the 2021 budget by the very significant capital allocation and current allocation that Minister O'Brien received and is spending. And my department will have a separate budget to provide for the accommodation that's set out in the White Paper than that budget for the Department of Housing. So whereas the actions have to take place in an all-of-government approach, they are separate in terms of my department will look after the housing for those in international protection, whereas Minister O'Brien's department will look after housing for those on the social housing list and other elements of housing. I think Deputy Pringle spoke of his own experience in terms of, and I know and recognise the extensive work he's done in terms of welcoming the new centre in Letterkenny. I believe that new centre is an improvement on those that exist at the moment, but that is not the model for what we're setting in the White Paper. The White Paper is very clear. Phase 1, reception and integration centres, short time period, 4 months, with very significant wraparound services provided within them, and then a move to accommodation in the community, in accommodation that will be independent living and that will be supported hopefully by those in that element taking up work if they can, and they will be supported too in taking up work. But if they're unable to find work, in support of a social welfare payment and a payment modelled on child benefit, which will support that independent living. A number of deputies, Deputy Smith and Deputy Sherlock, raised the recent issue of the workers, people living in direct provision who are working on the front lines in our health services. And I want to recognise there are hundreds of persons living in direct provision who are currently acting in our health services or acting in our social care services, and the HSE set up a system to accommodate them so they wouldn't be in the congregated settings of direct provision. I think about 1,500 places have been provided across the country. I know in a number of situations that have come to note recently, those placements have ended. I'm engaging with the HSE on what exactly happened there, and I think in a small number of situations, the person whose HSE housing placement had ended when their original direct provision centre had closed. And I know certainly in one of those situations it's a one we all welcomed the closure of, but in that situation they were re-accommodated in somewhere far from their work. And look, we will continue to work to better engage with the HSE as regards when the HSE provided accommodation is ending, so we can ensure that there is the kind of disjointed actions that happened in the situations that have been brought to the attention of the media recently don't happen again. A large number of issues have been raised here, and I'm not going to be able to respond to them all, but I suppose I note that Deputy Funshin and Deputy O'Cathaig focused on the importance of children within the White Paper, and I think that's absolutely essential in terms of the supports we will provide in the reception and integration centres, and involving TUSLA, providing childcare, and involving the SIPCs in each area to support the immediate integration of children and young people, making sure they have schools in the area, and the location of the new reception and integration centres will be the availability of schooling at primary and secondary level will be very much taken into account in the location of the reception and integration centres. Deputy Sherlock spoke about his own party citizenship bill, and I know Minister McEntee engaged very extensively with Senator Batchick on that, and also spoke about the regularisation process for undocumented workers, and Minister McEntee provided Cabinet with a an update on that this week. And for those who are undocumented, we think about 17,000 people in the country, including 3,000 children. And that was a commitment in the programme for government, and Deputy McEntee is working on that. And I think in September, the full scheme will be provided for, and that's within the 18-month time frame that we set out within the programme for government. And I know Deputy Naughton spoke about that as well. As regards, and Deputy Pringle talked about the issue of independent inspections, and I know Deputy Murnane O'Connor spoke of that as well. We will be getting HICWA to undertake independent inspections. As you say, right now the inspections are undertaken by a private company and by IPAS. That doesn't give the level of independence that we need. We're in detailed negotiations now with HICWA in terms of a memorandum of understanding, and I hope in the next number of months we will see HICWA take up that very important role. But I'll continue to update the Dáil because I know it's an issue of major concern. I know Deputy Murnane O'Connor wanted to talk about the level of funding that is available. So 225 million was provided for the existing IPAS services at the moment, and that was an increase of 45 million over the previous year. So it's a very significant investment, and I think we all know that the system we seek to create through the white paper will be one where the investment actually gives us a long-term return in terms of having actual accommodation rather than the over-reliance on the private sector that we have at the moment. Deputy Connolly and Deputy O'Reilly spoke of the vulnerability assessment, and we've had an obligation, which as a country we have not met for many years, in terms of the failure to implement a vulnerability assessment. We are now implementing a vulnerability assessment to all applicants who arrive in this country. It was a pilot because it was the first time we were doing it, and this is the first time we're doing it, and we need to learn. Because it is a new process. But let's be very clear, everybody is getting a vulnerability assessment now as they arrive. As I said, there's been 268 have been done already, and we will learn from the pilot and implement that in the full application. But I think that's a really important element, and that will hopefully avoid the situations that Deputy O'Reilly outlined in terms of people being allocated entirely inappropriate accommodation. A number of deputies spoke about what can we do now. Deputy Kearns, Deputy Smith, Deputy McGuinness, Deputy O'Sullivan. And just again, maybe reiterate some of the things I said earlier on. We are dealing with the issue of period poverty. I made a direction to all direct provision centres to ensure that period products are provided free of charge to all residents. We are dealing with the issue of bank accounts. The Department of Justice and IREC have engaged very significantly with the major banks. Big announcement from Bank of Ireland last year, and I understand that continuous engagement is taking place with other banks. We are dealing with the issue of the driver's licence. There is a provision in the Traffic Miscellaneous Provisions Bill, which will be coming before the Oireachtas soon, which will deal with that issue that prevents people in the direct provision process being able to apply for a driver's licence. And of course, there's the significant announcements that I made in the context with Minister Harris in terms of access to higher education and in terms of access to further education. And looking forward, we are aware that we need to move people out of emergency accommodation, because there's a significant number of emergency accommodation centres at the moment, many provided to try and get us through COVID and provide for the decongregation of existing direct provision centres. But the focus in the next year will be providing accommodation so we can move out of the existing emergency accommodation centres, and particularly a focus on singles and single men who far too often are accommodated in crowded situations, which are entirely inappropriate. And finally, just to say, I'm very conscious of the issue of the speed of the decision making. That's an issue that I'm working very closely with Minister McEntee. The decision making process remains a matter for the Department of Justice, but very significant investment in terms of finance, in terms of the new IT system, and in terms of new individuals have been put in place, and we will continue to work to shorten the period within which someone's application is adjudicated upon. A lot more questions. I would have loved the opportunity to address more, but I've no doubt we will continue to debate this matter in the months ahead. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks.